I never imagined the day would come when the person I trusted most in my life would try to steal everything I held dear. I'm still reeling from the shock, the betrayal, and the cold fury that coursed through my veins as I realized that my wife had been scheming behind my back. This is my story, raw, unfiltered, and unrepentant, of how I discovered that the woman I once loved planned to give away our 2 young daughters, declared that she didn't love them, and ultimately drove me to take drastic action. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. I'm here to tell you the truth. It started like any other ordinary day. I woke up early, made breakfast for the family, and kissed our sleepy little girls good morning. Life had a deceptive normality, a calm before a storm that I couldn't possibly foresee. My wife, Anna, had always seemed like the perfect partner, the caring mother, and the supportive spouse. But subtle inconsistencies had begun to surface over the past few months. Late-night absences, hushed phone conversations, and furtive glances exchanged with strangers left me with an unsettled feeling that I couldn't shake off. I chalked it up to stress at work and the pressures of parenting, never imagining that those small signals would add up to something so monstrous. One chilly evening, after the kids were asleep, I returned to our home office to retrieve some documents. That's when I stumbled upon an email from an unknown sender that sent chills down my spine. The message detailed plans to place our daughters in foster care and, worse, to give them away permanently to a family that had already expressed interest. My heart pounded as I reread every line, each word confirming a conspiracy that I had been blind to. It wasn't until I found a series of bank transfers and draft letters, evidence that Anna had been setting this plan in motion for months, that I understood the full scale of her betrayal. The initial shock turned to a burning rage. I confronted Anna the next morning before the sun had even risen. I remember the cold, calculating look in her eyes as she admitted to everything. "I don't love them," she said flatly, as if discussing a trivial matter. Her voice was eerily devoid of remorse. She talked about the burden of motherhood and her desire to start over, as if our daughters were nothing more than objects to be discarded. I felt like my entire world was crumbling beneath me, but it was also at that moment I realized I couldn't allow her to destroy our children's lives for the sake of her selfish whims. I called the cops that very day. I couldn't risk any more of her manipulations, any more of her lies poisoning my family. The officers arrived within minutes, and as they began questioning her, I could see the mask of pretense slipping. Anna's plan had been meticulously laid out, but nothing could have prepared her for the certainty of my actions. I gathered our daughters in my arms, and with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed, I left her behind. I locked the door behind me as I walked away, each step a declaration that I would never again allow betrayal to stand in the way of my children's happiness. In the days that followed, the police investigation brought every sordid detail to light. Anna's friends confessed that she had been acting strangely for months, and colleagues admitted that her behavior had become unpredictable. I wasn't surprised when I later learned that she'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a revelation that explained, but did not excuse, her erratic behavior. I was furious that someone who claimed to love our children would treat them as mere pawns in her twisted game. I made a silent vow. I would never forgive her. Instead, I would let the consequences of her actions speak for themselves. The ensuing legal battle was a blur of court dates, testimonies, and heated exchanges. I poured every ounce of energy into protecting my daughters. I hired the best lawyers I could find and meticulously gathered evidence of Anna's misdeeds. Every shred of proof was a nail in the coffin of her credibility. When the trial finally arrived, the courtroom felt like an arena where I was both the gladiator and the judge. I recounted every painful detail, the secret meetings, the hushed phone calls, the disturbing emails, and I watched as the jury's faces turned from sympathy to outrage. Anna's attempts to spin a narrative of victimhood crumbled in the face of irrefutable evidence. The verdict was swift and just. Not only was custody of our daughters granted to me, but Anna was also ordered to attend mandatory psychiatric treatment and counseling. I didn't feel a pang of pity as I walked out of that courtroom. I had made it clear from the start, betrayal is unforgivable. I knew that any lingering compassion for her would only leave my children vulnerable to her manipulation. The justice system, however flawed it sometimes is, had delivered a satisfying blow to someone who had tried to rip our family apart. Yet, as the dust settled, I found myself grappling with a cocktail of emotions. There was relief, certainly, knowing that my daughters were safe, but there was also an undeniable hollowness, a void left by the collapse of a life I had once thought unbreakable. I spent sleepless nights replaying every moment, every decision, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. But as time passed, I realized that the only path forward was one of resolute acceptance. I had done everything in my power to protect my children, and that was all that mattered. The aftermath of the trial saw a dramatic shift in my life. I became a single father, tasked with the monumental responsibility of raising two young girls on my own. The journey was arduous, filled with moments of sheer exhaustion and heartache, but it was also filled with the small victories that made every sacrifice worthwhile. I learned to balance work, school, and the myriad of emotional needs that come with parenthood. I took on extra shifts, attended countless parent-teacher meetings, and still found time to tuck my girls into bed at night, reading them stories and reassuring them that they were loved beyond measure. Every time I saw their bright eyes and heard their innocent laughter, I was reminded of why I had fought so hard. The transformation in our lives wasn't solely a result of legal victories or newfound responsibilities. It was also a metamorphosis of my inner self. The betrayal had been devastating, but it also awakened a dormant strength within me. I became more determined, more vigilant, and above all, more loving. I learned that the pain of betrayal could be harnessed into a drive to create a better future. The dark nights of anger and regret eventually gave way to a dawn of hope and resolve. I wasn't just a victim, I was a warrior, and I had reclaimed my power. Anna's life, on the other hand, took a downward spiral. Her bipolar diagnosis was only the beginning of a long, torturous journey into the depths of her own psyche. She refused to accept responsibility for her actions, blaming the diagnosis for every misstep and every cruelty. I watched from afar as she became entangled in a web of her own making, a cocktail of medication, therapy, and further erratic behavior that painted a picture of a woman lost in her own madness. I felt a perverse sense of satisfaction knowing that the person who had once tried to abandon our daughters was now forced to confront the consequences of her own fractured mind. There was no joy in her suffering, only a grim acknowledgement that karma had finally caught up with her. The turning point came one humid summer afternoon. I was at a parent-teacher conference when I received a call from a mutual acquaintance. Anna had been admitted to a psychiatric facility after a particularly severe episode. There was no dramatic showdown, no public spectacle, just a quiet, clinical acknowledgement that she was no longer a danger to our children. As I listened to the details, I felt a cold, unwavering certainty that I had done the right thing. I had protected my daughters from a woman who was incapable of safeguarding their innocence, and I had ensured that they would grow up in an environment where love and stability were the cornerstones of their existence. In the years that followed, our lives slowly began to mend. I watched my girls flourish in a nurturing, loving home, a stark contrast to the cold chaos of their early years. Their laughter filled the house, and every milestone they reached was a small victory over the darkness that had once threatened to consume us. I took comfort in the knowledge that I had saved them from a fate worse than abandonment, a life where their very identities were at risk of being erased by a woman who had lost touch with reality. I wasn't blind to the fact that Anna's diagnosis would haunt her for the rest of her life, but I was resolute in my conviction that my children's future was secure, and that was all that truly mattered. There were moments, too, when I had to remind myself that the road to healing was long and that scars, both visible and hidden, took time to fade. I attended therapy sessions, not because I doubted my decisions, but because I needed to find a way to reconcile the man I once was with the father I had become. The process was painful, facing the raw emotions of anger, betrayal, and loss, but it was also liberating. With each session, I learned more about resilience, about forgiveness, not for Anna's sake, but for my own, so that I could move forward unburdened by the weight of past transgressions. I learned that true strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the courage to confront it head-on. Now, looking back on those turbulent times, I see them as a crucible that forged the person I am today. I have no regrets, only the grim satisfaction of knowing that I fought for what was right. The betrayal stung like 1,000 cuts, but it also carved out a space for truth, for justice, and for the unwavering love I have for my daughters. I sometimes wonder if Anna will ever come to understand the magnitude of what she lost, but that thought is fleeting. I don't dwell on the past. Instead, I channel that energy into being the best father I can be, ensuring that every day is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Anna's face in the memories of a distant past, a face that once held promises of a shared future, now distorted by the bitterness of betrayal. I know that I could never forgive her. Forgiveness would be a betrayal of my own principles, a softening of the resolve that saved my daughters from a life of uncertainty. In my heart, there is no room for the person who sought to cast them aside. I have embraced a life defined by clarity, by the relentless pursuit of what's right, and by the unwavering commitment to my children's well-being. The journey has not been easy, and I continue to face challenges daily. But as I sit here, watching my girls play in the yard under the glow of a setting sun, I am filled with a quiet pride. I have taken what could have been the end of everything and turned it into a beginning. A testament to the fact that, even in the face of betrayal, one can rise, rebuild, and reclaim what is most precious. My story is not one of dramatic romance or whimsical fate. It is a story of gritty determination, of a father's fierce love, and of a cold, unyielding resolve to ensure that justice is served. This is my truth, shared not for sympathy, but as a reminder to anyone who finds themselves on the brink of despair. When faced with betrayal, stand firm, protect what you cherish, and let your actions speak louder than any words. I will always carry the scars of that fateful chapter, but I wear them as badges of honor, reminders of the day I took control of my destiny and ensured that my daughters would never be lost to a broken soul. In the end, I learned that sometimes life forces you into decisions that seem impossible, and that there is strength in embracing even the darkest parts of your past. I did what I had to do. I chose my daughters over everything else, and I will never, ever look back. The pain of betrayal may never completely vanish, but it has transformed me into someone who can stand against any storm. And that, above all, is a legacy worth protecting.